Hello, everyone, and hello again, Dr. Halawi. We're glad to have you with us. So to start talking about the topic of political absenteeism, we felt it's appropriate to start with the university scale, and then we'll expand outwards. So, like here, people around here, as Mari said, like we are organizing as the students in the LAU secular group alongside all the secular clubs in other universities. And given your experience when you were at LAU, as you have been the co-founder and the chairperson of the alternative student movement, which was also secular and progressive. And this was around 2011, 12, 13, 14, around that time. And so we are very keen to learn more about your experience with that, like what were the conditions, the context, obstacles, and successes. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rami, and thank you for inviting me. You triggered my nostalgia, although it's not the most convenient time to be an activist in Lebanon. But certainly it will turn out to be rewarding, at least at the personal level. So I have so much respect for you to being able to go against the trend. At times of despair, you're still trying to organize yourselves and do something different. Yeah, starting with the experience, I mean, we were triggered by the context of the Arab Spring. Obviously, there was a moment of hope. So completely different moment than the one you're in. كل المنطقة, everyone is feeling the possibilities of change, and therefore we felt it was very easy to be inspired. So we were just 12 people, really, 12 friends with different backgrounds. Some of us were, well, majority usually obviously is left-leaning, but we had some people who were more conservative. But all in all, we were all liberal and democratic and secular. So we thought, you know what, there's elections. Let's give it a shot. Let's try to get some people in. And it was unprecedented in the history of LAU. So we started a campaign called Take Back LAU Council. Campaign that was in tandem with another campaign that I was participating in with a group called Nasawiya at the time. كنا نجرب take back the parliament. So that was in preparations for elections, which obviously dragged for 6, 7 years. But hey, so to take back LAU Council, and then we had each one of us, I wasn't involved, but all the others were candidates, we call them independent candidates. So there was no alternative student movement yet. It was just an electoral campaign. But then one of us won, Hassan Harb. And then وقت بعدنا كنا عم نحكي the phase of 8 March and 14 March. It was still meaningful يعني. So then it happened that 8 March got 7 seats and 14 March got 7 seats. So it was this kind of beautiful strategic moment in which the independent candidate became على طريقة طوائف بلدة الإبان. So we now were able to turn this into something much bigger than a 1 seat. لأنه who would become the president of the council? They have to vote. So we tried to do game theory. We thought, you know what, Hassan, why don't you? We have a statement. So we wrote a statement saying to everyone, we're not going to vote to any of them, but Hassan will be a candidate for the presidency. So ما خصنا, if they voted, if the sectarian parties voted for Hassan, we're not giving anything in return. They probably did it because they don't want the other party to win. And indeed, we ended up having 14 March voting for Hassan, and who became the president of this council, although he was just one voice in the council. That involved a lot of blackmailing. So it was a very intense experience. Hassan was kidnapped from campus. جيب حركة أمل سحبوه حطوه بالمركز الحزب بفردان وبعدين his family started getting blackmailed. This is all happening in 2 days. It was very intense. His uncle was threatened to lose his job in the public sector. But the interesting thing, sometimes politics is about luck, right? Things just work. Hassan's father was in the Communist Party and he was a political prisoner in Israel. So the family has a history of struggle. And so he was able to connect to this experience and therefore he pushed forward. And we won, he became the president. And that's when we decided this is an opportunity to move from just independent individuals trying to win elections into a political movement, a student movement. So we established the alternative student movement, and I emphasize here the alternative. We did not call it independent. There's no such thing as independent. Independent from what? What are you? This is a very negative identification. So alternative student movement. And then we established our own newspaper called مش جريدة. وكنا بصراحة we were stealing resources from LAU and we were printing hundreds of copies بالarchitecture. One of our colleagues بالmovement, and we were distributing it across the city, and we had our. So yeah, it was a fascinating experience, and we kept winning seats, by the way, because we had a very strong organization. I can share this with you. I mean, the way we organized the movement. So even when we were leaving and others coming in, it continued, and we kept winning seats every year. But this 7-7 thing did not happen again. But we continued to win until 2014, 2015. I think it died down with the momentum. And the regional momentum dying down, I think, and failure of some people. But yeah, that was the experience.
Okay, thank you a lot. It's definitely like very inspiring what passed, and there's something also that you said that really strikes a chord with us, like, this idea of not just being ourselves by a negative label, like just being independent, but being something active, like being secular, and this is what we try to do. And at the same time now, like what we have in the university is this, like the university has this idea to keep the campus apolitical. So they try to do that, and they try like to keep these labels out, any political label, to keep them out. And like despite how like potentially it could be well intentioned as an approach, yet the reality is we're ending up with sectarian parties dominating the campus through proxies, through clubs, these proxy groups, while actual student political movements are not allowed to thrive or continue. So what do you think about this approach of keeping campuses apolitical?
Yeah, I don't know if it's been the same. Maybe it was different at my time. There was always this clear patronage network بالجامعة, and there's collusion between sectarian parties and officials in the university, which translates into the way they deal with people like you and us. But all in all, I cannot comment on this because I haven't been following exactly the details of what they've been doing, you know. But all I can say is in politics, there's always innovative ways of outmaneuvering the system. So yeah, you can be creative, you can find ways around it. And you're doing this already. So you can always find ways around the system. You can be underground groups, you can be secret groups, whatever it is. Whatever the situation is, you devise a strategy and you can make the best out of it. I'm sure that's the case. Just need to be ahead of the game. I mean, 2 steps ahead of the university, basically.
Yeah, sure, for sure, true. I think now maybe Joanna, are you here so you can continue with the questions?
Yes. Hi, Dr. Ibrahim, and hi, everyone. Thank you both for being with us. I'm going to give a brief overview about the situation in different universities in Lebanon. LAU and a few other universities like AUB and USG might uphold democratic rights and ensure student representation, but that's not the case with other universities such as Isaac and Balamand. And even NDU suspended student elections 2 years ago. For instance, Isaac Code of Ethics states that student elections are definitely forbidden. As for the Lebanese University, the only public institution in Lebanon with more than 80,000 students, the last election was held 13 years ago. And ever since, student representatives are appointed by the dominant political party in the respective faculty or branch. Now, as we know, the peak of student activism in Lebanon was in the mid-60s, where the student movement, الحركة الطلابية, managed to unite student groups across Lebanon and allowed them to accomplish many crucial goals. And then the civil war put an end to the movement and divided students across sectarian lines. Now, my question is, how can we revive this kind of student activism and its ability to reshape national politics despite the inexistent democratic and political life in most universities?
Brilliant. I like the fact that you've put things in the historical perspective. I mean, comparing and learning from the experience of the student movement prior to the war is quite important, and even during the war. But you know, the key difference, I think, between those two movements is that, unfortunately, at the time, I mean, compared to now, unfortunately at the time, there were ideas. I mean, there was a huge clash of ideas in the world, and the world was open to new orders. And therefore, the students were inspired by the possibilities that came with the Cold War. I mean, you cannot assume that you can understand student movement in Lebanon at the time without connecting it to the emergence of left-wing ideas and a complete kind of rejection to the elite bargain that shaped the country, I mean, specifically in Lebanon. This has died out. So therefore, we live in an ideological desert. So you feel like you're just walking around trying to find the viable alternative to the system. And kind of we're so attached to the idea of secular and a secular and a secular, because kind of what are we, right? So I think the key problem now that is on this specific point, just to stick to your question, is that students have to come up with new ideas of organizing not just students, but society. There has to be something that we can sell to society as students, a viable alternative order to them, not just the idea of secularism. Fine, I mean, we need that, we all do, but what is the socio-political and economic order that you are proposing? I know this is a big deal, but this is what inspires students to be part of a movement, when they feel they are bigger than the university, when this is something that is beyond the space in which they study.
Yes, 100%. And this is why, like, also when we're doing like this kind of work, we always put emphasis on not being just secular, being going further into like social justice and democracy and these other parts that are very important to have. Mark, can you go next? And here now we can talk directly about like the national, not only like the university scale, but something more broad.
Yes, sure. First of all, hi, and thank you for joining Dr. Halawi. And okay, so that the voter turnout in the last elections was around 49%. Although we are not sure this number is exact because of the many flaws that the voting process. But overall, the rate of participation in the Lebanese elections is low. So how big is the problem? For example, has it gotten any better or worse after the civil war? And what are the root causes of this disengagement in politics, and what are the dangers of ignoring politics?
Okay, three big questions. The first on elections. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure about the data, by the way. I've read other reports that suggest that actually the majority of people did vote. And the data we look at is not only outdated, but just categorically wrong. There's a lot of people who died that are on these lists, a lot of people that don't exist. It's quite a mess. I mean, there's a country without a census since 1932. We don't actually know what the population looks like and how many of us live in this country. So yeah, that's, I'm not sure about the data, but generally speaking, assuming that this is the case, that it was a low turnout, this is usually a sign that people do not trust the system, as simple as that, right? So they don't trust the system. And when I say the system, I'm not talking here about the political parties that are being presented in the elections. I'm talking about the system by which the winner of the elections run the country, right? This is where the distrust is. And the problem is elections itself is not where the system changed. Therefore, there's nothing for me to do if I distrust the system. I just don't vote. And elections is literally the process of reproducing the legitimacy of this system. مش عم بحكي بس in the Lebanese context. This is what elections is globally. It is the process of choosing new people to rule within a specific system. So if the population does not trust the system, and they know that the system works outside elections, therefore, even if there are nice faces, good people in the elections, they still might not vote. And this is because they know that the system that these people will be ruling through is not fair. So I think this is the elections dilemma. What was the second question again?
If it got better or worse, like the rate of participation after the civil war.
Yeah, it got worse. The election, the electoral experience before the war, obviously, for 12 years there was no elections throughout the civil war. I think actually throughout the war, ما كان في elections, 18 years. The last real elections we had in Lebanon, so the last free and fair elections, if you want. When I say free and fair, the sectarian parties did not know the outcome before it happened, was in 1958. And after the results came out, we had a mini civil war because they were like, what the hell? No, I didn't expect this. Which tells you something. You know, elections in Lebanon is not really a real process. It's something that happens after the sectarian parties agree on how to share power, right? So even in the last elections, we knew Saad al-Hariri compromised a lot before the elections. The real power struggle is over the electoral law. Upon agreeing on the electoral law, the outcome is guaranteed. So that's something that the Lebanese people learned, and obviously the civil war completely destroyed the legitimacy of the sectarian state, and therefore the distrust increased, and people only voted after the war because of direct ways of bribing and buying loyalties and clientelism, rather than in any form of trust in the process, electoral process.
Yes, and
the political
okay, sorry, yeah. There's also like this part that Mark was asking about, like what are the dangers of ignoring politics in general, like not just like could someone live without engaging? How is that possible?
It's not possible. I mean, politics is in people's beds, especially in a country like Lebanon. I mean, it's hard to say this to everyone, but without, let's say, civil law, we know for a fact that religious institutions, which are part and parcel of the political system, decides who can sleep with who and when and how much and the kind of abuse you see. So literally from your bedroom all the way to your access to resources via the state. So I don't think that people are not engaged in politics. I think they are engaged in politics, but in a submissive way, right? So saying that people are not in politics, no, that's not fair. I mean, people are discussing politics all the time in Lebanon, and they are affected by it on a daily basis. But the problem is they're not challenging the political reality that they live in, which they are subjects to.
Thank you.
So, the political dominance of the sectarian elites and the absence of well-established and non-sectarian political parties might have led to political absenteeism, especially among secular individuals. But how did political absenteeism obstruct the emergence of alternative political forces, which in its turn helped the ruling class guarantee and entrench its power?
Yeah, another great. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I thought you. That's it.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I want to know also how important is political organization to help opposition groups to break the cycle of mistrust and push citizens to be more politically engaged.
Brilliant. Okay, so political participation often comes after the emergence of alternative political forces. So if we want to really assess why people are absent, that's fine. But I mean, their absence does not lead to no alternatives. It's the other way around, because alternative political forces are not established by majorities. It does not start with 1 million people. There's a group of people that decide with a certain idea that they want to start a political organization. And that's when, as a result of that, people become less absent. Let's stick to your kind of terms. So in that sense, absenteeism is the symptom of the absence of political force, not political force is the symptom of the absence of absenteeism, right? There's a specific individuals in society that take the initiative, regardless if it's grassroots, horizontal, centralized, decentralized, but specific individuals have to take the initiative to establish the grounds of a political organization, and then we can judge why and when political people are being engaged or not. So I'm turning it around, if you don't mind. And the second point, how important is political organization? It's not just important; it is crucial. I'm aggressive with research that treats specifically the Arab Spring in Lebanon as if we are just a bunch of angry people that burst out into the streets. صار في معنا wave of protest. You see the research on Lebanon these days, even by Lebanese scholars. They look at 2011, الشعب يريد إسقاط نظام, 2015, You Stink movement, and 2019. As if in the middle, I mean, between those three moments of volcanic outburst, we are just subjects passively floating in the sectarian system. That's not really the political realm of the opposition. So yeah, absolutely. I think that reducing the idea of political opposition to the act of protest is wrong, because protest is only one strategic tool. It's a choice that opposition take as a way of advancing their political project. But the phenomena of politics is much more than protest, and it's strictly about political organization. So yeah, I absolutely believe that this is crucial. Why it's not really becoming efficient in Lebanon, that's a debate that needs some alcohol, but yeah.
Can you tell us a few points why? Just briefly.
Well, I'd like to hear yours. I mean, I'll tell you mine, but I'd like to hear your thoughts because you're on the ground. But I think, you know, this is the outcome of a very long process of distorting politics, of redefining politics by sectarianism, which, first of all, created a phobia about political organization. Like, people not only distrust each other, but distrust the idea of parties. كمان one of the phenomena of October 17 is people saying ما بدنا أحزاب. نحن ضد الأحزاب. شو يعني ضد الأحزاب? So what are you? What do you want? So this is the problem, and we've reduced the meaning of politics, which is a beautiful phenomena, into sectarianism, and people just buy into that. نحن مش مسيسين. If you recall, even in the protests, when people are being asked, هن بالمظاهرة، and they're نحن ما تقربوا السياسة، ما تسيسونا، شو عم نعمل نحن هون بالطريق؟ What is this? And this is interesting. So the meaning of politics has been distorted, and therefore we have the responsibility of bringing politics back to its real meaning. And that's when people start, I mean, questioning the knowledge that was constructed around politics, which they kind of repelled. I mean, they didn't find themselves in. And that's a big challenge, because we don't have the tools of the media and the system. They have so much resources, you know. The day after the protests, بدور الMTV والUTV wall, فجأة رجعوا نفس الوجوه. It's fascinating. It just shows you how difficult it is to challenge the system. Yeah, but what are your thoughts? I mean, I'm curious to know, what is your impression as students?
Well, it's hard to like point down what is the major thing that is causing this, like people not trusting maybe the alternative organizations that are happening like these days. And it's hard where to put the blame. Is it to put it on the organization, you know, these political groups themselves for not coming up with something that people find trustworthy enough, or is it because of like certain material conditions other than that, or what you were saying exactly, like how it's already like ingrained now that politics is something that's sectarian inherently. So yeah, all these things, it's hard to say what is the most important thing.
I think that opposition groups like don't have yet a clear idea and a united vision of how what kind of Lebanon they want. Like, for instance, if we talk about personal status laws, I'm sure like not all opposition groups would agree that we need a civil law. So there are a lot of contradictions between groups. They can't unite on one idea. So I think that is a big problem.
Interesting. So Joanna, you're saying that, I know we're going to have a discussion eventually, but I'm turning this into a discussion. So you're saying that opposition groups have to unite. This is a condition for them to become effective. On
some essential points, like, for instance, we need a civil state. Personal status laws has to be civil. We need a civil law, and like, this is a basic need. We need to unite only on the basic needs, and then we can compete and like on the other things. But the basic things, we need to unite on them.
Fair enough. Interesting. Yeah, that's good.
Completely.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
I think, I'm sorry I cut you off. I think in Lebanon, the thing that people need to agree on is a national narrative under which they would, like, it's some sort of an umbrella under which they would represent themselves. But you cannot agree on the sets of laws that you want to do in the time being, at least. لأنه if we're being realistic and if we want to really look at Lebanese people and what they really want, they wouldn't want a civil citizenship, civil laws or whatever. So we cannot force them into that, but at least we can have a national narrative that's inclusive of everyone and is understanding of the odyssey of different Lebanese groups and how everything has come about to be today. And when this reflects, then we have some sort of a constitution that would regulate the country And then after that, we can have, we can push forward for the laws that we want in a parliament, not the current joke of a parliament, but in an actual parliament with actual debates and with presenting our, visions with a lot of reasoning backing that.
Sorry, I lost you.
Zainab, you might be lagging. Yeah, Zainab, you might be lagging. If you want.
Right.
Is it okay if I add something?
This is everything that I wanted to say, and I really have to full internet, and I'm not able to figure it out. So I'm sorry.
Okay, no
That's
problem,
fine.
Zainab. If you want, you can try to
I'm just gonna add to that opposition groups want to change the political class, but they don't want to change the system. They don't realize yet that they need to change the system in order for them to change the political class. So this is also a problem.
So amazing. And I'm sorry I hijacked the format of the discussion. We probably can bring back these ideas at the end. So just to make sure we don't drag on with the discussion now, right?
No. Like be comfortable, and I think it's one of the most important points to dwell about. So yeah, go on.
Okay, great. Okay, brilliant. So few interesting thoughts. أول شيء رامي, material reality and other things. Yes, I don't think we should have one answer to all of these people. We cannot assess the lack of political activism in one answer, right? People have different material reality, relations of power, right? Where do they stand vis-a-vis the system? So that's important. And building on that point, let's just face it. نحن هلا, the group and everyone else we know, we are the minority. We are not the majority. So in politics, we have to kind of understand your position vis-a-vis the power. We are the minority not just with our ideas, but also with our relation with power. لأنه الدولة, the way we know it today, has recruited a huge amount of people after the war. And something that Basil Sallouk, your very own scholar at LAU, says, a very sectarian public sector. 80% of the population in Lebanon has at least, so families have at least one individual that has a job within the public sector. Not to mention the private sector, which أصلاً ما في شيء اسمه private sector بلبنان فايتين ببعض, بس إنه the idea is, even in the private sector, the way in which people get jobs, خصوصي بالbanking sector, which is connected to the political elite, is through وسايط loyalties. So we're talking about a society that is heavily invested in the system that we all hate. So this kind of complexity, we have to acknowledge it as we try to change it. So this goes back to the idea that نحن now, specifically in this moment, and حبيت that you mentioned material reality, very few people in this country have the luxury of political activism, right? Most people are trying to make ends meet. And the more the crisis expands, the more it deteriorates, basically, the more we will see less people having the motivation at the time and the will and the economic autonomy to spend time trying to challenge the system. So we're heading in a harder time. So نحن هلا نقعد نفكر كيف we have to create a national narrative where this, I believe, and I'm in London, is out of touch with reality. So I think we are in a specifically difficult moment in which we have to acknowledge that we are few. So we're a very small minority in the country. That's why students are vital. And that most of society does not have the luxury of thinking about and constructing narratives. And therefore, the challenge is to organize a minority, which is not a bad thing. Historically, political change, I mean, I've studied revolutions, and I know for a fact that people misunderstand revolutions because political change only succeeds when a minority, a progressive minority, organizes. Of course, you need people to be angry and take to the streets, but there is someone, there's a nation that co-opts the anger and then uses the chaos to be able to advance its position in power. That is what we need, organization, and it doesn't have to be the majority. It cannot be a majority organization. And then narrative comes after the formation of the state. حتى هلا بنرجع للأسئلة بالchat. So all this thing about democratic processes, about the parliament, this comes after we form a state, unless we disagree on the fact that we don't have a state today. And therefore, I'm not obsessed about representation. I am obsessed about redistributing wealth, and that can only happen via the state. So our fight, the position, is over the state. This is the only means in which we can take control and then change the policies. Big things like social justice can only go through the state.
Dr. Halawi, quick question, if I may.
Yeah, of course, go ahead. Sorry, I don't know who's talking, but yeah, go ahead.
Karim Salahuddin. So I wanted to ask you now, someone shed light on the idea of organizing an opposition, and you pinned on it, actually organizing an opposition, even if it's a minority. Now, my question is, such an opposition, the momentum that it would create on the long run, how will it be reflected on any elections if we've got that sort of gerrymandering, Lebanese gerrymandering, like the last electoral law that was passed in Lebanon? We have created 15 electoral areas or districts in the country. They were all created exactly to benefit the ongoing sectarian parties in the country. So even if we do create momentum, and even if we do organize an opposition, how do we take over parliament? How do we take over the state? How do we represent? How do we get any actual legit, technically speaking, representation? How do we get any laws passed that we believe are right? How do we get any civil laws passed if we can't actually get to parliament? Because the electoral law itself wouldn't let us. And with a divided opposition, as we see it right now, there are some minority parties that oppose the sectarian system. Now, they're definitely a minority, but there is opposition within those parties. There are different ideologies, even within the opposition. So it's not only about an electoral law that actually blocks any attempts of getting into parliament. There's also the fact that the opposition itself is made up of people from different ideologies. How do we deal with that?
Brilliant. Okay.
Is it okay if I added something before?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so basically, adding to the idea of organizing the opposition in Lebanon, what I noticed over the years that have passed since October 17th is that we can't really organize the opposition. Why? Because when the revolution actually started, we were like 50 active opposition groups, and now we became about 250 groups. Every time we try to sit on the same table, we fight over things that have nothing to do with the current situation. And we can't really, we've tried about like a dozen times to sit on the same table to form like one Jabha Sha'biyya, and it never worked. So I'm kind of losing hope because even the opposition groups in themselves are just a reflection of the system in Lebanon. So up till now, like 2 days ago, we were trying to form some kind of, some kind of organization between a couple of groups. Today, we had كان في تظاهرة من رياض الصلحة مصر في لبنان, and about 6 groups actually came together to organize it. And even within these only 6 opposition groups, we fight it over some things and we argued, and 2 of them just got out of it. So how do we deal with that when we won't even sit together and talk?
Good. Okay. I'm going to get back to the crisis of the opposition, but I want to build on the question that Karim, I think, raised by flagging out what Joanna said. Elections, if the reading is that political change happens via the parliament, then this is problematic. And this might sound problematic, me saying it, but this is my reading of revolutions. That revolutions or meaningful change in the system does not happen in elections. What happens in elections is exactly what Joanna said. It's a change in the political class. So new people governing through the same system. You do not form a state by doing elections in the absence of a state. You cannot do this. So, in other words, I want to flag out a contradiction in the position. If we all agree that currently, مش بس عم نقولها rhetorically, that currently Lebanon does not have a state, that it is actually led by 6 strong men, then it is really contradictory to say we're going to change the system by going through a democratic مهرجان ديمقراطي مع هول العالم. It doesn't make sense. You cannot do both. I understand that some people seek elections but because of a lack of political imagination. So how else can we change the system? Fine, we can discuss this. But I just want to flag out that there is no such thing as radical change via democratic elections in a country that does not have a state. They have all the 6 men. They have the ability to first postpone elections if they want to. And even when they do it on an electoral law that works for them. So your actual fight, Kareem, is if you have the power to change the electoral law first. Aslan, if you have the power to have a census in the country, to know who is voting and vote wherever they live, not where their ancestors were. كل هول منهم تفاصيل. هول they completely change the experience of voting and who votes for what. So I believe that the fight is not over a parliament because we don't have a government, we don't have a state. So the way forward has to be about a transitional government. عشان هيك I was very happy that at some point, this goes back to the aspiration that I heard from, who was it هلا? I forgot the name. عصار. Noor. The desperation with the opposition, but it's good that at some point we saw that all the opposition, at least all of the reasonable opposition, I'm talking about parties not groups, on في كتير WhatsApp groups, said إنه الحل هو بحكومة مستقلة ذات صلاحيات تشريعية استثنائية. ممتاز، لأنه this is an acknowledgement إنه we are in a crisis, political, economic, fiscal crisis, and therefore you don't go for elections in the middle of this. It has never been heard of in the history of the world. As an opposition, you have to lead the process of transition from the current crisis into the formation of the state. So I think despite the difficulties of this sounds to be much more coherent with the idea that there's no state and we need to form a state. And then we speak about the democratic process of what is the ruling class, who rules, proportional representation, etc., etc. But we don't do it the other way around. As for the crisis of opposition, Noor, let's be a bit considerate. We have not had healthy political life in Lebanon. So most of the people do not have political experience, or again, their understanding of politics is distorted because of what they've seen. So even I'm بحكي عن ناس genuinely independent or secular, but what does politics mean to them? Where do they get that knowledge? Where is this knowledge constructed? It is constructed in the sectarian system. And therefore, many of the ideas that they see in politics, even if it's unconsciously being represented in the way they deal with one another. So we have to give opposition time to mature, to learn, and to be able to overcome the distortion of politics that we see through sectarianism. And so we need patience. We need patience, and we all need to be part of the process. We shouldn't give up. It's a long process, despite the crisis. Last thing on this, but just before I hear back from you, and a lot of people tell me I don't want to join political organization because they're failing. مثل ما هلا مثلا one of the judgment هي إنه they're not even being able to sit on one table together. طيب بس ما this narrative is ahistorical, يعني anti-historical. لأنه historically, people who feel responsibility, they want to be part of political change, they don't do it under the condition that others are doing it. You join first, and then you make this political organization more mature, more able, more kind of secure, etc. But it's a vicious circle, like sitting here saying, okay, once these political parties do the job, I join. لا, you have a role to play in maturing these political organizations. Otherwise, they will never بيجيبوا resources, mental, human, etc.
I think you got me wrong, because what I said is actually from my experience with those groups. Like, I'm not talking just any groups, any WhatsApp groups. I'm talking about the active ones in الشارع. Like منفذ مثلا، مثل الطرح اللي أنت طرحته قبل شوي, which is about حكومة بصلاحيات تشريعية، وطرح اللي طرحه شرب النحاس, which is the only thing that actually الطرح الوحيد الموجود بالساحة حاليا. But the thing is, no matter what we try to do, we never end up talking together in a healthy way or in a healthy manner. We always agree on sitting together and then nothing happens. Like, we did agree على الحكومة, we did agree على طرح شرب النحاس, we did agree on everything, but then we looked and, okay, what do we do now? We had nothing to do. يعني ما قدرنا literally نعمل شيء. بشهر 4 I guess اتفقنا literally حوالي 50 مجموعة على طرح شرب النحاس. We all supported منفذ, we all did a great تحرك وكل هالشيء, and then nothing happened. So I'm not saying I'm not participating. I'm actually one of the active groups that are trying to do something, but then I'm saying nothing. طب شو
I'm happy to have this discussion because, to be frank, I am a member of مواطنون ومواطنات في دولة. I am the representative of the party in the United Kingdom. But I'm here speaking in my capacity as a scholar. So I'm happy to have this conversation. But I'd rather kind of continue with our intellectual discussion, and then we can think strategically about how. And just لحتى ما أكون هربت من اللي قلتيه نور. As Manfred, we're shit. We also have issues with how to understand the lack of substance that other political parties. We have to be considerate. Not everyone has evolved at the same pace, and not everyone have the same language, and not everyone have the same reading, and we have to be patient with one another as long as we can afford it, as long as we have time. The thing about Manfred is that we're struggling to accept how slow people are. Like, we're so obsessed about the fact that the crisis is exponentially deteriorating, and then people just have the time to talk about civil laws. And there is a moment in which you say, well, wait a minute. I mean, there's a much, much bigger problem here. The entire society is collapsing as we speak. Tens of thousands of people are immigrating. We have to do something now, not, I mean, talk about the details, but the way we do it is very condescending. So I'm very aware of this, and I'm more than happy to have this conversation after we're done.
Sorry, but she's raising her hand and she wanted to address a point. So Zainab, please address your point orally. Yes.
I'm lagging now.
No, you're good.
Circling back to narrative, and I think I am quite obsessed with narratives, and that might be why that's the lens through which I understand society. So, but the thing is, the reason I am obsessed with it is if we just look at Iraq, for example, and you know, and I do understand that revolutions are not a fixed point in time. It's a lengthy, arduous process. And if we look at the Iraqi opposition to Saddam Hussein, this is something that's for centuries. And if we look at post-2003 Iraq, which is an absolute and complete mess of a country. And the thing is that from what I have noticed, from what I have seen in Iraq.
We lost you, Zainab.
Okay. So
Am I lagging again?
Yeah,
yes,
we lost you.
Oh, I'll just write it down.
Yeah.
I'll write it down. خلاص.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zainab. Okay, maybe Mark, you can go over the last thing so that we can directly go into the discussion. It's already we already are stumbling on the same topic. So yeah, go Mark.
Okay, so after the October 7th revolution, can we be hopeful that more people will be more engaged in politics and more vocal in the elections? And will there be more change at the governmental level?
Okay, great. So can we just, at least, I mean, that's my demand. Can we be less concerned about people voting? So let's talk about people's ability to be active, to be agents and political agents, and then leave that voting bit, because, I mean, as I described earlier, it is not really our most convenient means to political change. We might be able to change or at least to have a minority in the parliament, but it's a facade. So therefore, strategically in this moment in time as a country, I don't think our priority as progressives is please علونا انتخابات. I don't think this is what will get us anywhere, you know? So what we really need to think about is how can we make people regain their agency and therefore organize and become political forces, and then, okay, elections, protest, no protest, bargaining, whatever you want. But let's just get to that point. Yeah, I think October 17 did bring a lot of people closer to politics, but also, and this is the سيف ذو حدين, it's two-edged swords. Because on the other hand, because people are so obsessed about protests, the moment that nothing happens after protests, they get disillusioned immediately. And I know a lot of people that participated in the protests and thought, well, this is the moment, things will change, khalas, they cannot ignore us. But this is not how history works. I mean, we all, whoever studies politics and history, know that. I mean, an organized force usually either literally co-opts the protest, or represents the protest, and therefore uses the protest to advance a new project politically, advance their position, their bargaining position vis-a-vis the political system. But this was not the case, and therefore a lot of people were disillusioned. So we have to find a way in which, and now thanks to people like you who are organizing, you're using things like protests in order to advance your position. It's no longer protest for the sake of protest. It's one of the tools that you can use to advance your agenda. So yeah, I haven't been in Lebanon for a year, so I cannot really tell you. You probably should tell me if after the uprising, more people were still involved or more people were disillusioned. But as I said, I don't think it's one or the other. Some people were disillusioned, but this is it, mazabtit, it's not going to happen again. And some others actually matured with the experience of protests and now are looking around into ways to politically organize or have already organized.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Halawi. Yeah, okay, go Mark.
حس كمان انه صار في كمان انه big change اكتر او انه الافكت تبع الاكسبلوجن كان اكبر evolution.
In what sense? Tell me more. يعني شو قصدك من اي ناحية؟
يعني انه الناس اللي كانت لدرجة عالية من بعد ما انه they got affected by the corruption تبع السيستم انه شوي يعني انه على حالهم.
Yeah, that could be the case, which is great. So now the bigger challenge goes back to Zainab's point, is how do you sell these people a viable alternative? So even if the entire society, and this has happened historically, انه بيكون عندك مجتمعات, they are aware that all of these who are ruling the country are, let's say, corrupt or even criminals, if you want to call them that. But then that does not really necessitate automatically political change, right? Because you can continue to be apathetic. You can say in the holy monsters, holy. So how do we capture this sense of distrust politically? That's a completely different matter.
Okay, thank you for your answers. Maybe now we can go to Zainab's point. She's just written the comments. She's saying, okay, I must be a bit wary about the lack of a narrative that forms the vision of and understanding of their vision of a state. Like Iraqi opposition were not united and did not agree on a national vision, and look how messy the country is 18 years after the invasion. This is not to say the government didn't face extraordinary challenges. The country is getting Lebanized. People are becoming more sectarian. Clientelism is on the rise. The constitution is a joke. The economy is on the verge of collapse. Like, shouldn't we try to and agree on a vision first, then move forward?
Maybe. I mean, Zainab, I'm wondering, who should be on a vision? It's a question that I want to hear from you. I'm aware that Iraq is being Lebanized. I like the term, unfortunately, and I'm following the work that is being done on Iraq, and it's very sad. Okay, the opposition, but also I know in Iraq, a lot of the ancien regime sectarian elite are co-opting the protests, and they've established their own political parties and selling themselves as football Iraqi case, but they are selling themselves as the opposition. So Kaman, it's very, very tricky. I mean, where do you draw the line of the opposition, and therefore what is the vision of the opposition? And that's why I'm less obsessed about agreeing on a vision, and I'm really more keen about how you can find a viable alternative to the order of society. So in other words, I don't want to create a Lebanese identity. I'm not that obsessed about في كتير ناس بتقول لك كتاب تاريخ وشو اسمه what is Lebanon. This comes after the formation of a healthy political life. This is not what is standing in our way into forming a healthy political life. But first you have to
completely change the relationship between these human beings and their state. العلاقة بين هيدي الناس اللي عايشة في هيدي البلد علاقتهم بالدولة وبالنظام has to change, and upon that the material experience that you have with a civil law and civil state creates new identities and new visions of the country, and that's a healthy experience. So someone has to start, obviously. I'm just saying that this comes after, not before, change in the material change in the way resources are being distributed.
How do we go about that? Shall we do like, I don't know, dialogue?
So we do dialogue, is that term?
No, I'm very, very bravely trying to challenge my bandwidth. Hopefully it's going to work at some point because I really hate typing.
Okay, shall I answer? How would we go about? Or
yeah, please. The thing is, because also looking at Lebanon and looking at the foreign interest in Lebanon, it scares me so much not to have a really tight plan on how to go forward. And I do believe that a country is not 100% independent. You cannot be 100%. Like foreign interests coming into the country and doing things the way they want to do it. So how do we have a plan and change everything without allowing too much foreign interference?
I'm not familiar enough with the Iraqi context for me to say how
I'm
we can
talking
turn this around.
Lebanon.
Oh, Lebanon. Okay, sorry. I just moved to Iraq now. Some people, so let me just lay out the options there. Some people in the opposition think that the best way to do it is through creating the foundations of a parallel economy. So completely kind of in the midst of this crisis, completely give up on the state-led economy, which is the political economy of sectarianism, and instead invest in a parallel economy that is cooperative and decentralized, etc., etc. Others suggest that this, first of all, takes a lot of time, and we do not have the luxury of time. Secondly, it fails, لأنه it's not sustainable. Nothing can really compete with the economy of the state historically. And thirdly, that people in the country are still very much hooked to the strategic resources of the state. So offering them cooperative alternatives is not as lucrative as you would think. But this is the sort of one way of doing things. Those who critique it, which I just explained, would suggest that no, the fight is straightforwardly over the state. And in the context of the circumstances today, as we've been discussing, we are a minority. And therefore, acknowledging that we are a minority, we have to organize as a minority and do the work of a vanguard. Try to connect even with the external powers, Zainab. لأنه the idea that you want to arrive at independence does not mean that you don't have to find in the process some way to meet with narrow interests with external powers that would allow you into the system. If your fight over this is over the state, if the fight is not over the state, then external powers can just continue to meddle until you create your alternative economy to the state. But so in short, it's either a vanguard, so people from the elite, these are the ones, as we've just said, they are the ones that have the luxury of political activism. So when we say elite, the people that are economically autonomous from the sectarian political economy. So this group of people take the initiative and therefore establish the grounds of political organization upon which other people in society can join. And they act as vanguards of a new alternative, a viable alternative that they sell to their people, to the people of the country, but also they try to use the circumstances to advance their bargaining position vis-a-vis the local elite and external powers. And the other option is, as I said, grassroots, coordinated and cooperative economies that reduces the grip of the centralized sectarian political economy on society, but this is a much more long-term and horizontal process.
Which do you think is more viable and realistic in Lebanon?
Well, I did mention, I didn't hide the fact that I'm a member of Muwatinun and Muwatinat, and so although I'm speaking in my scholarly capacity, but I mean the fact that I'm a Muwatinun, I think answers it. I do believe that the fight is over the state. And there is no alternative to the huge resources that even هلا هي bankrupt. There is no alternative to the power that the state have in distributing resources and blackmailing citizens. So you have to have a way through the crisis to encroach on the state, and then that's when you see meaningful change. Otherwise, you can keep demanding things from the sectarian parties, which is a very contradictory thing. I mean, again, other than the contradictions of the elections, but the idea that you claim that these people are illegitimate invaders, criminals, etc., بعد المرفأ بالتحديد, while at the same time demanding them to be accountable, to do things, to do this and that, is contradictory, because you cannot say that they are at the same time illegitimate and criminals while demanding from them your own rights. That sort of political strategy is contradictory and is deemed to fail.
And what's the roadmap for that? How do we form a state in the current conditions?
Are we moving into that trajectory? I don't know. Must be hands raised, by the way. I just want to make sure.
Yes, I wanted to say if you can just suspend that footnote for a bit, and maybe you can go to Tia and then Karim so that they can ask the questions. So Tia, please.
Hello.
Hi.
Hope you're doing great. I'm sorry, I just need to leave because I have 3 exams, so I just wanted to ask you a question and then leave.
Sorry.
I have 2 things to say mainly. The first one is that we Lebanese people, like back to the political absenteeism thing, we say such statements like, I'm not into politics, and I used to say that in a Bil campus, not a long time ago. So it's because, trust me, you're talking with people that are like brainwashed, literally, we're talking as if it's an easy thing, an easy process. But it's definitely not, because we're not in a safe community. We do not live in a safe community where you can share your opinion freely about, especially the political orientation. Like if I wanna, for example, talk about the secularism or give my opinion about the political people يلي عنا إياهم بلبنان, I really can't, because you know the history of conflicts between us. So try to look for it, like you try to look for a community where you can talk. For example, here, and I joined the citizenship and the secular club at the university, where you are safe to be very honest with your thoughts, and people can understand. That's the point. We don't have acceptance between people. So I think this can be the first step to try to change the mindset, at least for the new generation, not the old ones, because they cannot change. So we're looking forward, like, for the second generations, when we die, يكون في people that are not very politically oriented in a way that they might kill for each other. And the second thing I want to say is a question that if you were like in our place right now in a club and a student in a university, we're activating a club that promotes secularism in such a bad situation right now. So what do you advise us to do? Like, what steps do you advise, like, to give us and to start making this change as students? Thank you.
Tia, just a quick question. How likely are you to stay in the country after you finish your degree?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
How likely are you to stay in the country after you finish your degree?
Not likely.
Okay. So,
but let me tell you something, that if I have the chance, like the opportunity in Lebanon, no, I'll stay in Lebanon, because I'm very like Lebanon oriented, not a foreigner, you know.
طب أنا Lebanon oriented. هي أنا قاعد منقوع بلندن and I'm doing this for a reason.
Yeah, so I'm talking reality. When we talk reality, أكيد حفل
Yeah.
I leave things that
I'm asking. Yeah, I'm asking this not just to put you on the spot, but to make a point. That changing the mindset is problematic. كمان is doing things the other way around. If we all agree, sectarianism in general creates the conditions of existential crisis all the time. As a phenomenon, sectarian parties, sects, they are inherently existentially insecure, right? They are معمولين to be aggressive towards one another. This is by their own nature. خصوصي in the absence of a state, because in the absence of a state, or in their way of colonizing the state, right? Bassel Salloukh now is calling it in post-war Lebanon is the process of sects colonizing the state, taking over the state, and then abusing its resources to channel their own interest. So the mindset there is the product of sectarianism, which is not a mindset. Sectarianism is a system. And therefore, for me to be able to arrive at a safe space, which I guess what you mean by that is a healthy political life, I need to take them out of the state. They have to quit the state. Or at least I have to have a say in the state, which allows me to distribute resources differently and make sectarianism less existential. Because then human beings, which are sectarian, no longer feel that they are existentially threatened by the others. And then mindset becomes less kind of aggressive or insecure, etc. So this inherent insecurity becomes less significant if we distribute resources in a way that is not conditional upon sectarian quotas or sectarian loyalties. But having said that, dark story is it's very likely that people like you, people like the 22 people here in the call, will not be in the country in the next 5 years. So in other words, it's very unlikely that we're heading towards a more liberal or open society. If we fail as a minority, again, I insist, as a minority, to organize and try to be part of this or lead the transitional process in whatever way you want. We spoke about grassroots, we spoke about targeting the state. There is no way that the outcome of this huge crisis that we're going through is more open-mindedness or more space for people like you and me to talk and debate and hear one another. It's very likely that we're heading the other way around. Oh, advice, sorry. Yes, advice on student movement.
Yeah. You have the right. You have the right to forget.
لا مش I have it here, but it's just I got caught up with the idea of the dark future. I think what MADA is doing, I mean, as a network of connecting different political student organizations, is one way forward. I mean, students have to understand their fight not as campuses, as islands of contestation with an administration, but as a class in society, as a segment of society that has shared interest. So that is crucial. But I think the next move for students is to become, how can I say it, less obsessed with changing the political class and more obsessed with taking over the state. The next day after the Iranian Revolution, the Iranian students were the one that went and basically took over the US embassy and created the hostage crisis and defined the fate of the Iranian state, the new state, for the next 30, 40 years. So I don't think that you should see the limit of your work as a fight with administration, although I completely understand, in this point, the existential fight you have with your administration. But the way forward to become strong and defining your own future is to play a part in the political process outside the student realm. And that requires you to be strategic politically, to find your alliances, to make compromises, to have a narrative, goes back to Zainab, that is not necessarily very kind of progressive or self-righteous, but a narrative that gets you somewhere on the map. So politics, basically.
Thank you so much. But don't you think that the first step towards being oriented to the state, as you said, isn't it to try to get them out, the administration, the political parties اللي ما بنياهم, as a first step?
So من الدولة بنحكي صح؟ ولا بالجامعة؟
Yeah, دولة.
الدولة بلا أكيد. That's the when I say a fight over the state, there is no state now. So I'm saying a fight over them going out of the positions of power. The question is how. Of course, that's another debate. But yeah, absolutely, it's a fight with them. Otherwise, it's not a fight. You take over the state. But they are the ones that are colonizing the state.
Okay, thank you so much, Doctor. It was
Good luck.
really nice. And thank you, Citizenship Club. My pleasure. Bye.
Good luck to you. Take care.
Thank you, Dr. Batel. We can take
Dr.
off
Ibrahim.
Karim.
Can I ask a question?
We're going with the questions with the people who have raised their hands, so we can go in order. Karim Safiuddin, can you go please?
Awesome.
سوري عم تسمعوني لانه ماني معود على ويبكس.
سامعينك. تفضل استاذ.
وش كيفك ابراهيم؟ مشتاقين
Yes, we
لك.
can.
ف يعطيك العافيه. I really enjoyed صراحه the talk, and I think giving two perspectives. I'm not gonna ask a question. I'm gonna, if no one minds, I'm gonna make a few comments, some ideas, taken from perspective. I think what you mentioned, the two variants within the opposition, makes quite sense in terms that you have people that are doing the grassroots work. Mada is one of these people. That they integrated into spaces and trying to create a new common sense in these spaces, discussions, نوعا ما هيك شيء شوي Gramscian يعني بمعنى انه they're having these constant conversations within campus to try to see if they can arrive at a new counter hegemony بالافكار or new material that is being presented to students, and even also making a form of social community يعني بمعنى انه هود الناس مش بس political comrades، هود رفقات وبيعيشوا سوا معارك، ولما هيدا الشيء بيصير فيه انسجام كتير كبير وتضامن جدي بيربطهم ببعض وبيزيدون عن الهويات الثانيه الموجوده، ان كان هويات طائفيه او هويات طبقيه او زبائنيه او الى اخره. وبنفس الوقت في فاريانت مرتبط بكمشه الدوله، هو انه نحن نقدر نوعا ما نمسك الستيت، واي ثينك هيدا الشيء كان موجود ب 17 تشرين عليل من بعد اول فتره اللي هي انا بسميها الفتره العفويه، اذا شيء انه كان في فتره when we were so proud of this leaderlessness وكل هيدا، وبعدين في ناس قروقوا انه اوكي حكومه انتقاليه مستقله وفي ناس نوعا ما تجيشوا حوالين هالاقتراحات لنطرح شيء جدي، which I think is quite important, and I think these two variants ما بعرف if you said contradiction in this term بس I wouldn't say it's contradiction. I think they complement each other بمعنى انه في عندك these people that are conquering these various social spaces، وبنفس الوقت في عندك ناس عم يفكروا بهالطريقه. بنفس الوقت يعني I would like to present a self critique يعني بكل معنى الكلمه لنا كلنا كناس جزء من المعارضه او جزء من التيارات التغييريه او البروجريسيف بالبلد، بمعنى انه الناس اللي حابين يكمشوا السلطه كمان ما لازم كمان يفوتوا ب short cutting process برأيي. يعني الشورت cutting process كمان مرتبط انه right now we're gonna not think a lot about this creating this ideological hegemony. نحن حنفكر بشبكات مصالح موجوده بالمنطقه، حنفكر باي وزاره فينا نشبك، وبنفس الوقت نشوف الخطه كيف تنعمل بطريقه مضبوطه، وهيك بنوصل للسلطه وعلى هذا الاساس بنطبق هذا المشروع. بس I also think it's a bit more complex in Lebanon، بمعنى انه المعركه الثقافيه منا معزوله عن معركه كمش الدوله. يعني there are two poles here, and I think لما نشوف نحن and this is something that's worrying in the opposition, you have several fronts that exist. In my opinion, the reading is that you have a front that not بدهم كمان يعملوا هذا الاسلوب، يمكن بيعملوها او من خلال حكومه انتقاليه او انتخابات نيابيه مبكره اول شيء، وهلا انتخابات نيابيه صاف يعني من دون مبكره او اي شيء، او ما عندهم مشكله ما على الكتائب فور اكزامبل، او مثلا ما عندهم مشكله انه اوكي تعال نشوف القوات شو عم بيفكروا، وهيك بيكون عندنا نظره شوي معاديه لحزب الله. وفي جزء ثاني من اول الثوره من مستقيم شوي مواطنات في دولة والطرح الحكومة الانتقالية المستقلة، ولكن بنفس الوقت بدنا نطلع على شبكات المصالح بالمنطقة، وهون ما فينا كثير نعلق على سلاح حزب الله من هذا المنطلق، انه هذا الشيء بيكون مشكلة، وبنفس الوقت في عندنا جمهور كبير بالبلد. And I think these two dichotomies are a bit dangerous. And it's a self-critique that we need to present with ourselves. And it's something that we need to look at, is that you can actually be a vanguard and you don't have to concede, at least in the first part. You can actually present the project and you don't have to reproduce the cultural hegemony that exists إن كان مربوط بالقوقعة الطائفية اليمينيه quote unquote بالبلد او الهجمونيه اخترعها حزب الله. يعني I think these are two hegemonies that exist and we want to break them, and I don't think these two opposition fronts have done a great job at doing this in my opinion at least, especially مع التحديات اللي نحن فيها هلا. يعني it's been 2 weeks since Lukman Steam's assassination, it's been a few months after the huge regional turbulences, and I think that's where the grassroots and is about to a rejectionist culturalist attitude, the grassroots has to collaborate with a vanguardist attitude that does not concede in these matters. And I think that's a self-critique that I haven't found the answers for, but it's something worth pointing out when at least assessing the opposition in the country. Just a few cents from my part.
مشتاقين يا كريم.
حبيبي.
Okay. I'm so jealous of Karim's bandwidth. Internet until طيب, very interesting points. I don't know if you guys لحتى not to the format of discussion, but I'm gonna engage with them, and then if there's anything left from the questions, then we can get back to them. So yeah, I did not say that they contradict one another in terms of the long-term goal. They might end up complementing each other. It's not certain. ما فينا نعرف هلا, but it might be the case. So it could be the case. بالنسبة للثقافة والدولة, they're not taking they're not different things. They're part of the process. I do disagree. I think culture is the product of relations of power. Okay, so you cannot produce. I know what you mean with hegemony. حتى the way Gramsci is being used and abused these days. كلمة حزب الله عنده hegemony وهوليك عنده hegemony. لا, في hegemony. مش في hegemonies. في hegemony around which polarization is constructed and reconstructed, sectarian polarization, which somehow keeps everyone in power. So this is the hegemony. مش في hegemony صغيرة هون وهونيك. So عم نحكي narratives. But the idea that when Gramsci says hegemony, it is the way in which rivalries are created. بيصير في political clashes, contestation ضد حزب الله مع حزب الله, مش مشكلة. But somehow this rivalry, even the best outcome of it, does not change the concentration of wealth and power. Okay, so this is where hegemony is, and therefore I don't separate the two. I think there's one, and Hezbollah is part of it, and then openly so. مش هلا بالنسبة للstrategic choices, I think what you're saying, Karim, is interesting. Like you're saying even vanguards, هلا grassroots surely should not compromise on anything لأنه they're not going through the questions of the balance of power مثل ما أنت عم تقول, and reading the region and trying to find cleavages in which they can kind of pull in. مزبوط. So therefore they have much more room of maneuver بالخطاب بس. But on the other hand, when you talk about vanguards, naturally politics means you have to make choices. You have to make choices in the sense if you decide you want to say all the right things, بمعنى right اللي انت معتبرهم هن right بمعنى moral you are very unlikely to go anywhere. I have not read or studied a revolution in history which involved vanguards. They did not position themselves strategically, not based on self-righteousness or progressiveness. And حتى the most romanticized people, let's go for Lenin. Lenin used the German Empire, which was at war with his own country, his own people, Russia, in order to go back to St. Petersburg and be part of the revolution. نفس الشيء كمان Che Guevara, he killed his own people. He killed kids in front of their family. So this idea that vanguards do not have to concede or compromise, I have big question marks about it. حتى you don't have to think about it as a compromise. Compromise about what? If your goal is not righteousness, your goal is to actually have the means to be able to implement a certain project, then what are you compromising? You're not compromising anything. But from the position that you are in, as مثل ما عم تحكي مدى grassroots, you look at the vanguard and you say, شو هذا? There's too much concessions. But maybe it's not the reading from their position. how they are doing politics. Yeah, so I'm just gonna leave it there لحتى ما نطول. But I'm very interested in the meta experience. I think it's fascinating, and the work that's being done. مثل ما كنت عم أقول everyone here in the room at the beginning is not only promising, but also it contradicts the political trend of the entire country, which itself is very exceptional. Usually these movements arrive with a certain regional and local environment and momentum that is convenient, and so you're going against the trend. One of the critiques كمان that, speaking of counter-hegemony and social community, is that there's a concern that you might yourself turn into a sect. يعني if you say in all of, you're creating شيء بسموه الذات الجماعية. This is much more than just a political movement. There's a community. You don't want to deal with كتائب. You don't want to deal with anyone, which makes absolute sense from a grassroots perspective. But the other side to the coin is, where do you stop? Where do you make sure that it doesn't turn out that secularism itself becomes like a community, like a sect? Yeah, just let's leave it there to get dragged into a longer discussion.
Okay, في كريم صلاح الدين. Please go ahead.
Okay, Dr. Halawi, I wanted to ask you, you did mention that perhaps our focus should be on organizing ourselves as an opposition. And you said that there's actually no viable alternative to this, that we should actually try to persuade people to overtake a state or to retake the state, reclaim the state. But you also did mention that there's that sort of parallel economy. So how exactly do we persuade people that the state is our only solution, retaking the state is our only solution? And when there's parallel economy, there's it's not only proxies. We've also got other sectarian parties that are trying to create their own mini states, their own economy, their own working environment, their own banking systems. So that's my first part of the question. And the second would be, can we actually ignore any foreign interference or foreign repercussions? At the beginning of the interview, you talked about the 1958 mini-civil war. So we know that it was due to Kamil Sham'un enacting the Eisenhower Doctrine, etc., etc., etc. So we've always been an area or a piece of land where we've seen that political repercussions of world powers do affect Lebanon. So how exactly do we deal with that? Do we simply ignore the fact that there's any type of foreign interference and try to just reclaim the state without taking into consideration? And we've got some people that were betting, let us say, on an Iranian-American deal, which I personally find naive. I guess that the best thing that we're going to get is a JCPOA 2.0, or just reenacting the JCPOA as it is. Why do we still think that we are a main point of interest or a focus of interest for world powers? Why do we still think that world powers really care about what happens in this country? And why do we get ourselves involved in the issue of Hezbollah's arsenal? It's kind of messy. Why? So, and again, how does this hurdle or burden or affect any plans of actually reclaiming the state or persuading people that our only viable solution is by reclaiming the state? And if we do tackle Hezbollah's arsenal, etc., don't we just end up in another Doha 2.0 like we showed like in 2008 and re-legitimize the already corrupt political parties that we've got?
Well, it's too many questions, Karim, but I'll try to address some of them. You went on a tangent here, but I'll start from the end. Why do we discuss Hezbollah and the arsenal? Simply because you cannot form a state. You cannot form a state without finding a way to resolve this issue. You cannot have such massive arsenals within while, you form a civil state. It just doesn't work. So regardless, even those who celebrate the arsenal still, you have to solve it. You cannot ignore it. If you are to ignore it, then you simply have to withdraw from the project of forming a state. Parallel economy. I think you misunderstood me. What I meant is, when I said parallel economy, I was talking about the opposition that thinks that it can produce a cooperative economy that is alternative to the state economy. And what I mean by state economy, that is not necessarily the state itself, like the healthy economy that we have in democracies. I mean that sectarian parties have colonized the state and have used the state to form, as you pointed out rightly so, their own mini states. But that is the state economy they've created. They've created a state economy, a huge public sector, an inflated public sector. One of the reasons why I do not like the idea of كلهم يعني كلهم is, where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line? 80% of the population have somehow or another been recruited into the state. As Bassel Sallouk again called it, a very sectarian public sector. So this society has been entrenched in a state economy that is inherently sectarian. So that's why some of the opposition is imagining an alternative parallel economy that just gives up on, as obviously this state economy is collapsing and went bankrupt. So how can you forge in a parallel economy that materialistically provides a tangible alternative to people, and therefore that's when you start constructing legitimacy of an alternative. While the other side of the opposition, like Muwatinun, say, well, this might work, but it needs a lot of time, and if it works, it cannot sustain itself, because you cannot compete with the state economy. It's so massive, it's very strategic, and it has international connections and channels. So that's what I meant. So state economy involves many states, it involves colonizing the state, it involves the absence of meaningful competition in the market, it involves absence of policy. Now, foreign influence, very, very briefly, I don't think that foreign powers are really concerned about us as a country. But what sectarianism did, what sects did when they colonized the state, they themselves brought the external into the internal. Our entire fate relies on those 6 men that are betting on the external changes, betting on the region, betting on international changes, and they advance their position of power based on these bets. Whoever gets the right bet wins a seat, right? Gets better terms in the next government. So that's why the external world affects us, not because they're concerned about us, but simply because the local elite have connected our fate, their fate basically, but the country, because they are the ones in power, to external powers, not the other way around.
So, Doctor, I get from you now, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that it's not just about colonizing. Could I rephrase it to saying that we have a de facto federalist system in the country?
No, because the federal system includes a central state.
Well, okay, yeah, we also lack that.
We don't have a federal state.
Yeah, okay, gotcha. Thanks.
Zainab, you want to go next?
Yeah, so I do agree that the state has to do with, your access to resources, or at least your proximity to resources, and what the current politicians have done so successful in Lebanon is that they've hijacked all of the resources, so you don't have any access to them unless you're approximate to these people. And my question is that how can we, the civil society, try and appeal to the general public and try and get them on board with us when we are so far away from these resources? Like, what do we have to offer them in the time being? This is my first question. My second question is that it's something that you said to, I think her name was Taya, about whether or not we're staying in Lebanon. And the thing is that I was living in the UK. I flew in on the 27th of October 2019, and I've been in Lebanon since. I do plan to stay a bit longer, but realistically I can't, because my life is not in Lebanon. How can we, if we go abroad and go back to our, in my case, to my life, how can I still and be of effect to the situation in the Middle East and to Lebanon?
Okay, appeal to the public. I mean, this is the $1 million question. People like Muwatinun, party that I belong to, have failed to appeal to the public, partly because of a decision. It's a choice you make, that you want to focus your resources elsewhere in your target. and partly because the resources that were allocated to appealing to the public did not really, they were not used strategically. Narrative goes back to your point. Our narrative is elitist. On the other hand, you have the opposition that chose to speak only to the public, and assuming that the way forward, as Karim, Safiuddin have accentuated, is through a change of political culture first, which then leads you into the state. That's a $1 million command debate in politics. Where do you start? Institutions or culture? The egg and chicken. So yeah, this is a big dilemma. But I think both sides believe, at the end of the day, you need to give people a tangible alternative. So they need to feel in terms of material relation that produces new relations of power and then new legitimacy. Okay, one criticizes the other that you don't do, it's not going to work. That's fine. That's another point at the end of the day is appeal has to involve a change in the material reality of people. Otherwise, especially in the midst of such a crisis, you cannot sit with people who you have 70% of the population that will need aid. You cannot sit with them, talk about them about an alternative, secular or civil state or a better world or social justice. This is not how politics happen. You have to touch upon the narrow interests of people and show that you can fulfill them. And when you fail doing that, what does revolutionaries do? Again, back to the romanticized story of revolutions, which is absolutely not true. And once you study revolutions, you hate them. People like Lenin, Trotsky, Che Guevara, all the you think of the all romanticized, beautiful people, they used to shoot people in their head in front of their people. You have to terrorize people into accepting the alternative once you fail to materially fulfill their expectations in order to find your way into power. This is the reality of politics. If we want to use the most righteous narrative, we're the best people, we're all very progressive and nice and happy and we don't want to touch everyone, okay, khalas, fine. But this is not what gets you to power. This is a fact of history. We cannot change the realities of politics. Let's concede to that and instead not seek power, instead demand our rights. We do a civil rights movement, right? So those same people, instead of keep on calling them criminals or illegitimate, we concede to their power and we start trying to lobby for rights, a law, civil rights law, civil marriage, blah, blah, أشياء صغيرة. But the reality of politics is you just drop all your moral obsession with morality and instead you think strategically about how you can move forward and you push yourself into the public either by terror or by giving them something materially useful to them. هلا مواطنون acknowledges this and therefore the way forward is to encroach on the state, because once you are in the state, you can give people, it's feasible to give people something materialistically, and therefore you change your relationship with the people and you establish the legitimacy of a new state. Or you create an alternative state. في كتير حالات بالتاريخ where you give up on this state completely and you create your own polity, an alternative government basically, which demands the legitimacy of the people. تنزل بتقول هي حكومة جديدة، خلي الناس تنزل على الشارع, support, do you believe this is the government that should govern? Yes, okay, بصير في عندك two legitimacies and they fight over the state. Yes, exactly, kind of like what Aoun did, and absolutely, yeah.
Okay, Karim, you wanna go? Raising your hand.
Sorry, أنا كنت رافع الculture versus institutions. كنت حبيت كمان أعلق على الموضوع لأنه برأيي شيء مهم. هلا أنا بعتقد لما وقت أنا قلت contradiction I think أنا كان قصدي الشيء المرتبط بإنه بدك تعمل alternative state versus you want to grab this state. I think هون كان إنه أو فيك تعمل an alternative economy plus alternative state plus alternative structure أو you grab this state that exists. هون كان قصدك إبراهيم بالcontradiction إذا ماني غلطان وما فيك تعمل هول الشغلتين سوا.
Exactly, it's not possible. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. انا بعرف انه في نماذج كثير بالمجتمع اللبناني هلا عم يفكروا على صعيد انه يعملوا تعاونيات كوبراتيفز مثل كنت عم بتقول، فكره الالترناتيف ايكونوميز، فكره انه يكون عندك اراضي زراعيه، الترناتيف مصانع، الترناتيف يمكن الترناتيف بانكينج سيستم. يعني كان في دكتور جاد شعبان عم يشتغل على هذا الشيء. وهون الناس، بس هول الناس بنفس الوقت هن بpolitical movements that actually want to grab the state. So the way I see it is that I don't see it's a complete contradiction. I do think that you can create أو تمهد نوعا ما a transfer of power or economic power between the different structures that exist, خاصة من the structure that exists, the state itself, to more decentralized democratic. I think حتى يعني في مجموعات مختلفة نوعا ما دعمت هالمبادرة إن كانت وماذا كانت يعني من الناس اللي جزء من بعض الحوارات حوالين هذا الموضوع. And I think it's an interesting one. In terms of culture versus institution, and I think this is where maybe we could either disagree or maybe not very interpret يمكن نفسر بعض بطريقة explicit. I think one can be a vanguard and still be quite clear on their political propositions to create this vanguard around a certain ideological common sense, يعني, at least for their members and for the social groups that they're representing, which what you're saying is a social minority, and that completely makes sense at the same time. But you see, I don't think our positions should be, so this is what the state should do. It also should be, this is who we are, and you're still the vanguard. I mean, you're still the person that's grabbing power. You're still making political choices. يعني بمعنى انه نحن عم نتاجر مع الشعب السوري حتى ولو عارفين هالتجارة مرتبطة بالنظام السوري اللي دمر شعبه So we are doing concessions every day. There's no such thing as ethical consumption or ethical political action. نحن كل يوم نحن عم نمارس هالconcessions، يعني واضحة كتير، بس انه واحد في يمارسها ولكن بنفس الوقت ما يتنازل عن الخطاب. أنا برأيي هيدا شيء أساسي. يعني I think this is the differentiation. And I don't think maybe you could suggest that you actually have to do that. يعني بنلاحظ انه الحريري قاعد مع حزب الله وتاني يوم بيروح على السعوديه وبيعمل مشاكل معه. يعني نحن يعني اذا هن منايك نحن ما فينا نتمنياك، سوري عم نستعمل المصطلحات بس عم جرب افكر بطريقه هيدا انه هل نحن قادرين نبندق بنفس الطريقه بهي السلطه بتبندق فيها، بمعنى انه we can insert our ideological animosity towards them on a constant basis to not reproduce their. And I do believe that there are multiple hegemonies, in my opinion. I do believe that Hezbollah is a hegemony of itself, and the Uwati part of politics is also a hegemony. The Lebanese right is also a hegemony.
Ideologies.
Ideologies.
You're confusing
ideologies.
You're confusing the two.
طيب okay يمكن it's nomenclature بس بالأساس I think my main point is that the vanguard does not have to concede in terms of discourse, even if certain choices are made and are said quite clearly. But I do think is that what people are doing here is that they're confusing these choices by recreating a new discourse, in my opinion, that could reproduce the current hegemony of the state or the ideologies of the people that we're facing and that are destroying us on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, great. بالنسبة للإيكونومي والparallel economy, what you suggested is excellent. يعني if and I'm aware of the initiative تبع جاد شبان. So if what is being done is establishing a parallel economy, which is not really a massive economy, مثل ما قلت أنت يعني, just trying to create some surplus and employment which produces a community that sees a tangible interest in your alternative. And this is not to replace the state, but that's your way into creating your own legitimacy and encroaching on the state. This is excellent. This is historically sound. بس أنا عم بحكي عن مثلا بحقز approach in which cooperative economy is not a tool or a strategy أو واحدة من الوسائل in which you build the foundations of a legitimacy towards taking over the state. لا. They believe that this cooperative economy will produce its own political system, which is decentralized or localized, or absolute democracy, or مدري شو, Catalonia, a very romanticized story of anarchical organization. So I appreciate the distinction, and the former makes absolute sense. بالنسبة الchoices والبندقة, by the way, هاي البندقة اللي عم تحكي عنها كريم, this is not, and a lot of Lebanese say this, but this is not our sulta like being exceptional to politics. This is politics as usual. I mean, this is usual politics. So that's why I'm saying, us doing it, it's not importing the culture of the way in which the sulta does politics. This is politics. Okay, just to point that on. بالنسبة للconcessions, Hezbollah or otherwise, when we use the term concessions, we're assuming that we're giving up something, صح? That's why I was talking about what is your goal. So if you're trying to say there's a distinction between being strategic about the way you work, but not compromising on your narrative. Actually, your narrative is part of your work. So I agree, and okay, you're trading, let's say, with Syrians, but and you're saying the Syrian regime is a criminal. But the narrative has consequences on the reality. It's not just a discourse. Out there, I'm going to keep saying the right things because I think these are the right things. Regardless, no, this is it has repercussions. So in that sense, my question is, why do you assume that a position that is not with or against Hezbollah is a concession? It's concession because unless you're losing something, it's not a concession. You're not losing anything. I mean, from the perspective of the vanguards, you're not losing anything. You're saying, but you're losing, you're reproducing the supremacy of sectarianism. That is something we have to agree to disagree on. لأنه yes or no on the Hezbollah arms, outside the context of history and the political system, outside the context of hegemony aslan, which you've confused with ideology, you would be reproducing sectarianism. لأنه the polarization we're seeing today, مثل ما قلت أنت, is a polarization around سلاح Hezbollah. On one hand, we are seeing the re-emergence of something like 14 March, bringing back the idea that it's all about Hezbollah. And on the other hand, there's increasing insecurity إنه لا ما حدا يقدر بهذا السلاح. كلنا بنموت إذا راح هذا السلاح. طب فإذا if my narrative strategically is yes or no, then بالعكس I'm falling for a polarization that is sectarian. But, and this is a huge but, and it's very challenging, being strategic with your narrative and avoiding falling into this polarization, which is much stronger than you. Now, this is the hegemony. That is when you're not conceding. If you're conceding, you take a side. If you're not conceding, you try to be strategic. Because you're losing a lot. There's a polarization, and they are the majority, not you.
Okay, thank you for the exchange. Karim added, by the way, a point in the chat saying that Tahachi did participate also in a group with the top-down groups as well. Would you, let's see if there's Zainab wants to ask something.
Yeah, just Ibrahim, you did not cover my second question, the one about how if we have to leave the region, how can we try and help from afar? Because I really I'm so passionate about that, but I have a whole life outside of here. I'm a stranger here in a sense. So yeah.
We're all strangers here in a sense. الداخل والخارج. هلا هول اللي قاعدين معنا, all of us, we are intruders. We are the minority. So I keep saying this because it's very important. I'm tired of people thinking إنه نحن هلا suddenly صرنا majority. Please let's do elections so that we win everything. Anyway, بس زينب كمان historically, people in exile, let's call it that, we're being exiled and we're being exported.
Absolutely, that is exactly the word for it, and exactly.
Yeah, but these people play a defining role in history, right? So the fact that you're outside, you can still be organized. All of the political parties, at least in the context of Lebanon, the opposition parties, they are now active outside Lebanon. So it's one of the battlefields. هذه واحدة من ساحات المواجهة مع النظام الطائفي. So I think there's a lot that can be done outside. If anything, given the circumstances, there's more that can be done outside than in Lebanon. Because as I said, the society will be collapsing even further. We'll see more crimes, organized crimes. We'll see more terrorism at a local level. It's the natural outcome of economic collapse. And therefore, society will be very busy trying to make ends meet. But the exile, or at least the diaspora in general, they have much more room of maneuver, and therefore they will be defining to the future if they organize. مش إنه بيبعتوا aid ومدري شو NGOs وهيك.
Okay, thank you. I think we can.
Sorry for interrupting. Actually, Silvana raised her hand. She wanted to ask a question.
بعتلي إنه شيل بس بقى موجودة.
Okay, sure, no problem.
I think we lost Rami. I can't hear him. I don't like this WebEx thing.
Actually, it's the internet in Lebanon. We truly face a lot of problems concerning the internet in Lebanon.
Yeah, I know. Never gonna change.
Okay, I was asking
Actually,
okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Rami, we can.
Okay, I was asking if you want to conclude, but I've heard there's a question. If you want, we can take another question. Or you can, Dr. Halawi, or you want to...
Actually.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so let's go.
Well, we have Layla. We have Layla asked a question at the beginning of the discussion in the chat box, and Fadi Khalil. So if they're still in the meeting, they can address their questions orally. They're free to do so. Layla Hummus and Fadi Khalil address 2 questions in the chat box. So I don't know, can you hear me?
So Laila wrote she cannot use
might
her
have been
mic
answered
anymore, so
throughout the discussion. Okay.
So you believe that more alternative representation in the political
Fadi Khalil as well.
The way to make people more engaged in the democratic process. Yeah, I think. Okay, just let me quickly, Layla, on this point. I would say there is no such thing as a democratic process. I'm sorry, I'm being very blunt, but the democratic process happens after the formation of a state. So if we all agree that there is no state in Lebanon today, we're still shocked that there's no state. Technically, there's no state. Then you don't have a democratic process. You have a process of either forming a state or heading into a completely failed, like the Somali case. So after, you can only speak of democratic process after the formation of the state. But yes, I think you're referring to the discussion we had at the beginning about political organization. And political absenteeism is not leading to no organization. It's the other way around. Some people have to take the initiative to organize, and then we ask ourselves questions whether or why people are not engaging or joining political organization. But yeah, it's the only way to make people more engaged. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, that's there, but not in the democratic process, in the political process, because there's no democratic process. This is a power struggle that is far from being democratic. We are the minority again. Yeah, okay. Is there any other?
Okay, if there's no other questions, we can...
I have a question, actually, if you have time.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay.
Actually, thanks for your input. You truly enlightened us in a lot of points, actually, and I really appreciate that. My question is there a way we can change the political culture that we have in Lebanon, or the maybe the political normativity, actually, because to a certain extent it became a norm. It became a set of norms in Lebanon, and everything related to sectarianism and this culture, basically. So is there a way we can change this culture, or at least to have it to be as minority and not majority?
You need an alternative ideology to do that. Absent the ideology, the only way you can do it through changing the material reality of people. So as we were discussing earlier, that one of the ways in which people start to reimagining their reality is when their source of living and the relationship with power changes. So if you manage to take over power or have some form of power and then deliver something tangible to the people, then that new relationship of power produces a new set of knowledge, new identification. So that's one way of doing things. The alternative is having very strong ideology. So again, goes back to the last successful revolution in the form of the Iranian Revolution. Khomeini had an ideology which was viable to the people because people were praying 5 times a day. They know what he's talking about, at least the abstract ideas of values of Islam. So you need to have an ideological alternative for you to be able to convince people that there's something different about the way they can read the world without providing them with a material alternative. Yeah, so it's either ideology or changing power relations which involve inclusion of the state.
Okay, so quick follow-up question as well. Do you think that this new ideology might be instilled from foreign relations and international interference, because taking into account that we are a third world country, Lebanon has been depending on international interference since decades and since the existence of Lebanon actually, حتى even before إعلان دولة لبنان الكبير. So do you think that can we form this new ideology, or can we have this ideology without international interference and foreign relations and foreign politics?
I don't know. What do you think?
In my opinion, I think that Lebanon cannot function without international interference.
What kind of international interference? That's the question.
International trusteeships, basically, to a certain extent, because immediately once the Beirut blast explosion took place, the first thing that all our politicians did is that they seek help and Macron and USA and other countries. So basically Lebanon cannot function and cannot basically accentuate and يعني يعمل هودي القصص الإدارية ويدير شؤون دولة بحد ذاته without international trusteeships.
See, that's a distortion of politics that sectarianism did. So this takes us back to the first part of the discussion when we were talking together about what actually makes people absent in politics. And we said they're not absent politics in their beds, but they are passive towards politics. It is because politics has been distorted. And one of the ways it has been distorted is sectarianism has invited the external into the internal. It's very hard to create, given the absence of the state. The state usually, political theory, the state usually is what separates al-kharij min al-dakhil. ما في شيء تاني. There's no such thing that separates what is domestic from the international except the state. So in the absence of the state, you cannot draw that board. There's no such thing anymore as internal external. فهيدي كمان لما people who accuse Hezbollah of being doesn't care about Lebanon, they look at the region. ما كلهم هيك. There is no such thing as borders when there's an absence of a state. Sectarianism itself requires the invitation of external powers into the internal affairs. So you're absolutely right. In these specific kind of politics, the sectarian politics, inherently, naturally demands partnerships with the external world and betting on the external powers in order to advance its inherently insecure and aggressive relationship with one another. But this does not have to be politics. The formation of a state, كمان مرة, is the only way in which you can change things without begging the international powers to do something about it. When they won't look for an alternative. Macron will not come and say, well, guys, you know what? Let's build a civil state. The external powers deal with the situation as it is, with the balance of power. So we have to be agents in reimagining and creating our own organized opposition, which forces recognition from the external powers to its project through some form of legitimacy that is internal. And then you start drawing the borders again through the formation of a legitimate state. Otherwise, you're right. Ideology will keep on being transcending borders. Different sects in different times of history will see themselves as Lebanese or not Lebanese. حسب ظروفهم علاقتهم بباقي الطوائف. This is the reality historically. Hezbollah is not an exception to our history. It's a symptom of it. And that's why it's not a hegemony. It's part of the hegemony. It's the product of
it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you a lot, everyone. I think we have to be concluding at the moment. So, Dr. Halawi, I'm giving you the final statement that if you'd like to say something, add something.
No, I want the final statement from you. I want to see what you agree, what you disagree with, what you're actually, how are you dealing with the situation? As I said earlier, my experience at LAU as a student was much easier than you طبعا. الظروف الاقتصادية on one hand. but also more importantly, the momentum. We had the momentum. I mean, it was a much better time to be politically active. And you're going against the flow. The country is going in the direction of more passivity, more attachment to sectarianism. So what are your thoughts? How are you going to outmaneuver this?
Yeah, I think we've touched upon a lot of like questions that we should dwell on, like to have a more refined answers. But at the moment, especially like given our role as like at the moment, and the difficulties in like and the very little options that we have, I think we're trying to do this complementary thing where we do changes in culture while at the same time trying to work and check out alternatives, seeing what can directly go into the state, like these different kind of oppositions. And I think like through the discussion we went on several of them, either creating like alternative systems of economics or like directly going into the state and using its functions. So I think that's like something that we have to have more discussions about, so that we have something. But we thank you a lot, Dr. Halawi, for being with us. Would you like to say something after that?
Yeah, I want to thank you so much for inviting me. It was a pleasure. And as I said, you triggered my nostalgia. What you're doing is incredible, and it's not regrettable. And it's very likely that all of us will fail. This is the nature of politics. Grassroots, alternative economy, encroaching on the state. It's more likely that we will fail. Because winning in politics, I mean, taking some form of power involves a huge amount of luck and a very contingent overlapping factors that are internal and external. And you have to keep betting at very high odds. And if Ines, مثلا, in the case of Muwatinun, they say, you know, this is so naive. Should negotiated transition? Why would they negotiate with you? Fine, but I mean, every proposal for power is betting on very high odds. Everything is unfeasible, unless you're in the military and you want to do a military coup. That's the most straightforward way of taking over. So don't feel demotivated. Don't be crushed by the tragedy that is imminent. Try to turn it into an opportunity. And if you are really politically, if you want to be in politics, you have to have perseverance. Most of the people that changed their fate are the ones that accepted crushing defeats one after the other, but still managed to pick up, build, and organize. Until, again, as I said, a combination of luck and contingent overlapping actors and factors turn things around. And until this happens, your mom, your dad, your aunt, myself, everyone will say, you're wasting your time. Because people cannot imagine what politics is. Politics is not a formula that gets you to power. You don't count votes to get to power. It's really a mad world. So you have to continue to try until you seize the right opportunity. So don't give up. You will not regret it, even if you keep losing.
Thank you a lot. Very inspiring indeed. Thank you for everyone that was with us, and thank you, Dr. Halawi, again. Intellectual and activist, thank you for being with us. Good night. Have a good night, everyone.
Take care. You too.
Thank you very much for your
Thank
time.
Thank you, Dr. Halawi. Thank you.
Thank you.